The meeting room was full of faces I knew well, but my voice had been stolen before I could start. I clutched my notebook where my idea lived, bright drawings, careful notes, the whole plan, and watched my boss slide the same idea across the projector. He said the words I had planned to say. He smiled like it was his thought. My hand shook. My mouth tasted like metal. Everyone applauded. I felt my world fall through a thin glass floor. "Bailey, that's brilliant," he said, and his eyes were cold as steel. I tried to say something, to point to my notes, but the room moved too fast. My heart was hammered in my throat. The shame burned hot and heavy. The team congratulated him. My manager patted him on the back. I left the room pretending I had to get coffee, but really I ran to the stairwell and leaned against the cold concrete and swallowed the scream that wanted out. I felt small, like a child whose picture was taken and hung up as someone else's art. I had been betrayed in front of everyone. I had proof. I had dates. I had timestamps. My hands closed around the notebook. I decided right there I would not disappear. I sat at my desk staring at the blank chat box, the email half written and unsent. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could write a polite note asking for credit. I could confront him in the hallway. Or I could do nothing and hope someone noticed. Hope felt weak. Anger felt sharper. I opened the folder on my laptop, found the file with timestamps and version history. My idea had drafts saved, emails sent to 2 coworkers, and a dated sketch. The proof pulsed on the screen like a small heartbeat. My boss's presentation had slides that matched mine almost exactly. He'd even used my phrase, the one I invented to sum it up. My mouth tasted bitter. I thought of all the late nights and the small sacrifices. I thought of how I'd bragged to my sister about the idea, how I had drawn diagrams on napkins. I remembered the trust one had placed in the office, the team I had believed in. I opened the company policy file on intellectual property. My hands trembled. There were rules, but rules felt like paper against a stone wall. I hit send on an email to HR, my fingers fumbling with courage. HR replied faster than I expected. "We received your email," it said, neutral and cool. They asked for details and promised to investigate. That gave me a tiny breath of hope, like finding a life raft in a storm. I compiled everything. Timestamps, drafts, the chat logs where I mentioned the idea, the 2 coworkers who I knew in casual conversation. I forwarded it all and felt the relief of doing something official. At the same time, whispers began. People who used to say hi crossed the street. My boss acted normal in meetings, but when our eyes met, his look was sharp and near empty. I overheard him tell someone that ideas were team property. The phrase stung. I watched him present my idea again to a client, this time with a different angle, as if to confuse the timeline. The client loved it and signed a small pilot. My chest clenched. My colleagues were getting praise tied to what was mine. HR scheduled a meeting but said it might take weeks. Weeks felt like an ocean. I started keeping a private log. Dates, times, names, reactions. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Maya. No, wait, scratch that, wrong name. I deleted the thought. I needed someone who'd believe me. I needed a plan. I reached out to Danny, the only coworker who'd seen my early sketches. Danny had a soft laugh and a straight spine. She met me at a quiet cafe and slid a tiny smile across the table when I told her everything. She believed me without hesitation. "We'll figure this out," she said, and the certainty in her voice warmed me. She also worried about the risk. Danny warned me that accusing a boss could backfire. Losing this job could be devastating. I told her about HR, about the timestamps, about the presentation. She suggested one move I hadn't considered. Find a way to publicly show the timeline without looking like I was trying to sabotage him. We brainstormed small, careful ways to remind people of my involvement, mentioning parts of the project in casual chats, bringing up my work when meeting the client, saving every new draft with clear dates. Danny offered to be a witness if needed. When I left the cafe, I felt steadier. But then I saw my boss leaving a building with a client, laughing, and my stomach dropped. The pilot was underway. If the client loved it, the company might rush the project, locking in credit. The stakes grew. I whispered to myself, "Don't panic. Plan." The next morning, I started leaving subtle fingerprints of my authorship in places that could not be easily rewritten. I began small. In meetings, I referenced an obscure detail, an early choice about color and tone only I had argued for. Someone picked it up and praised the idea. I watched their faces change when they realized I had been involved. A few people nodded to me in that new way, surprised respect. But then the boss announced a quick, high-profile demo and took the lead. The demo happened in a glossy showroom with cameras and a senior director watching. I was not invited to present. My hand shook so hard I nearly threw up. From the back row, I watched the boss take the narrative I'd built and polish it with charm. The senior director asked pointed questions that only I could have answered. The boss stumbled through them, leaving gaps and vague answers. I wanted to stand up, shout the truth, but the showroom hummed and eyes bored through me. Afterward, the director praised the team, a phrase that swallowed me whole. As people left, a junior engineer named Amir lingered and clapped me on the shoulder. "You had the best framework," he said quietly. His words were a patch of comfort, but when I checked my inbox later, there was a formal note. The boss would lead the project now. My job title didn't change, but the future did. I felt the wire of anger tighten. I needed leverage. That night I went through old hard drives and cloud backups at home. Late night breaths and the hum of the laptop filled the apartment. I found an old backup folder with my earliest sketches, saved months before the presentation. The file metadata showed dates and times. I printed them, my hands shaky but steady. I also found an email trail where I had sent a draft to a friend who'd given feedback. That friend, Cameron, could testify. My phone rang with a message from HR. They were reviewing the case but wanted more evidence. I prepared a neat packet. Copies of files, screenshots of messages, printed timelines. I considered hiring a lawyer. The idea felt expensive and extreme, but maybe necessary. I told Danny, and she nodded with a grave look. "It's not just about credit," she said. "It's about your voice." The next day at work, something strange happened. My boss left a folder on my desk labeled with my project name. Inside were mock-ups, slightly different from mine. He'd been tinkering. Had he left it there by mistake? Or was it a trap, planting evidence that he'd worked on it too? I took a picture of the folder and locked it in my drawer. My palms sweated. The game had become about proof and timing. I felt like a detective in my own life. HR called me in for a formal meeting. My palms were clammy. The room smelled like dry coffee and old fabric. They asked calm questions, wrote notes, and said they would interview witnesses. I handed over my packet. HR's tone was professional but clipped. It felt like being placed inside a machine. My boss sat across the table and smiled thinly, offering a casual, "We're all on the same team." He denied everything. He said the idea had emerged from multiple people brainstorming, that it had been a group evolution. The HR rep listened to both sides and said they would take time. On my way back to my desk, someone called me too sensitive in a whisper. The office shifted. People who had been warm grew chilly. Emails slowed. My tasks piled up. The pilot team started moving fast, signing contracts and booking resources. I felt time turning against me. At home that night, I got a text from Cameron. "I'll testify if needed." It was a small bright thing. The next morning, a surprise twist, the client requested a demo with me specifically, saying they'd heard I had the technical background. My heart lurching, I prepared. This could be the moment to set the record straight, or a new trap. The clock ticked loud. The client demo day arrived. My chest fluttered with anxious hope. I prepared slides and practiced answers. Danny offered to sit in the room as support. The boss insisted on leading, but the client asked to hear from the person who built the concept. The boss blinked, then pointed to me like a man trying to hide a bruise. I stood to speak, feeling both small and fierce. I explained the concept, the decisions, the experiments. The client leaned forward, eyes bright. After the demo, they asked specific technical questions about the earliest prototypes, questions only I could answer. I answered clearly and honestly, and the client nodded with respect. Afterward, the client asked to meet again privately. I felt a surge of relief. Maybe the truth would come out. But then, in a twist I hadn't expected, the boss cornered me and offered a cold deal, except a small bonus, and the company would call it a shared idea. He warned me that pushing harder could ruin careers. I glanced at Danny, who looked angry. The client called me 2 hours later. They wanted to work directly with me on the prototype and asked if I'd join as a consultant. My skin prickled. Opportunity, or complication. The lines blurred. The client's offer was tempting, an internal consultant role with visibility and a chance to shape the product. But the boss warned sternly that outside work could violate company policy. HR's investigation was ongoing. If I left, I might lose my legal leverage. I sat cross-legged on my living room rug and weighed choices like coins. Danny urged caution. Cameron offered to introduce me to a lawyer who handled small creators. I set up a meeting. Meanwhile, workplace pressure increased. The boss announced a big internal milestone and named himself project lead in a public email. He also invited a few select colleagues to a special workshop without telling me. I felt invisible and betrayed again. But then a twist. Amir, the junior engineer, came to me with a USB stick. "You left these designs on your desk," he said. I saved them. On that stick were early prototype files showing my unique architecture. My pulse sped. Amir agreed to be a witness. The legal meeting the next day felt heavy but necessary. The lawyer listened, nodded, and suggested a path that didn't require instant resignation, demand formal credit, negotiate a contract amendment, threaten escalation only if necessary. It felt like a plan with teeth. I followed the lawyer's advice. Draft a firm letter demanding acknowledgement and compensation, backed by my evidence. The lawyer warned that escalating could make work tense, but it also forced the company to take a clear stance. We sent the letter. HR replied with a bland acknowledgement and said they'd expedite. The boss reacted with quiet fury. He stopped speaking to me, but his presence filled the room like a storm cloud. He began to publicly question timelines, justifying his control. My daily tasks doubled. I received a note from the client expressing frustration at delays and asking for direct contact. The company forbade it. The tension cut both ways. The boss needed the client's approval, and the client needed results. A twist arrived as an unexpected ally. Elena, a senior director who had attended the showroom, requested a private meeting. She said she had admired my technical knowledge and had been puzzled by the presentation gaps. She hinted she had the power to influence the review board. My heart fluttered with tentative hope. Elena asked a pointed question. Had I documented my work? I said yes, and handed her a copy of my packet. She left with the documents, promising discretion. Her promise felt like a bright thread. Elena did not move fast publicly, but inside the company wheels turned quietly. HR widened interviews. The boss asked for more resources and praise. The client grew impatient and threatened to take their business elsewhere. The company panicked and convened a review meeting. They scheduled a formal hearing, an internal panel with legal and product leads. The hearing date felt both like a battlefield and a promise. I prepared meticulously, rehearsing my testimony and lining up witnesses. Cameron, Amir, Danny, and Elena in a supportive but cautious role. The boss prepared too, with slick slides and edited emails that blurred timelines. I felt small standing near him in the corridor, but my packet of evidence weighed more than my fear. The hearing day came, and the room hummed with tension. I presented my case calmly, pointing to dates, drafts, and witness statements. My voice shook only once, but I kept steady. Then the boss stood and turned the room. He produced a new draft with recent edits and claimed collaborative credit. The panel looked confused. I felt the air shift. Elena raised her hand and offered a detail only the original creator would know. Heads turned. The boss faltered. The panel announced they would deliberate. We left the room with different kinds of fear. Deliberation took longer than I hoped. Rumors spread like wildfire. I saw colleagues giving half smiles, unsure where I stood. The boss tried to rally support, whispering that my complaint was disruptive. HR continued interviews and asked for more documentation. I sent in everything I had, layered and neat. At night I could barely sleep. My apartment felt too small for my thoughts. The lawyer advised patience. Public exposure could damage everything. I worked quietly on side projects, keeping my mind busy. Then a twist, a news leak. Someone from a rival team posted an anonymous note about idea theft on a company message board. It spread within hours, and external contacts began to notice. PR called legal. The boss was furious and suspected me of leaking. I was horrified. I hadn't done it. But the loud noise forced leadership to act faster. The panel expedited the decision. Elena called me privately and said the leak complicated matters, but had also pushed decision-makers to care. "Don't reply publicly," she said. "Let the evidence speak." I felt the world was narrow to the size of my evidence folder. I sat on a bench in the park and breathed, feeling both exhausted and oddly focused. The next morning, the panel announced a final meeting. The final panel meeting had the weight of a courtroom. The room smelled of fresh coffee and quiet anger. Each side presented closing remarks. I spoke from the heart, telling the story of late nights and small sketches of the moment in the stairwell when I decided not to be silent. I felt raw but found clarity in my words. The boss gave his final statement, showing polished slides and claiming the idea as part of a collaborative push. Elena quietly slid a printed log across the table, an internal chat colonizing dates that matched my drafts. The panel listened, thumbed pages, and asked pointed questions. Then an unexpected twist. The client called mid-meeting and asked to be heard. They praised my work directly and said they preferred me as the lead consultant. Their voices carried weight. The panel adjourned to deliberate. We waited in the hallway like families awaiting a verdict. I held Danny's hand. She squeezed and whispered, "Whatever happens, you did the right thing." The panel returned. The lead said they had reached a decision. They would credit me as the originator and assign me to lead the prototype under a new agreement. Relief and fear collided. My boss's face went pale. The decision changed things quickly. Legally, they amended the credits and offered a compensation package. The boss was stripped of lead status and reassigned. He left the room quietly, eyes hard, but he didn't lash out. Some cheered softly, others avoided me. The client sent a formal contract offering me a lead role as consultant with clear credit and compensation. It felt like sunlight through a cloudy day. I felt vindication but also complex emotions, triumph flavored with the sadness of betrayal. The boss requested a private meeting and handed me a small, stiff envelope with a note. "I'm sorry you felt wronged." He left without explanation. I almost laughed at the emptiness of the phrase. Meanwhile, the leak investigation continued. Leadership wanted answers about who had posted the anonymous note. I had no proof, but I held my head high. At home that night, friends celebrated quietly. Danny toasted with cheap soda and said, "You did it, Bailey." I felt proud but uneasy. The story wasn't finished. The boss's reassignment hinted at possible backlash or future maneuvers. I decided to accept the client contract, but first I wanted clarity on the leak and on future safeguards. As I prepared to sign the client contract, a new twist surfaced. The boss had filed a countersuit claiming co-authorship based on collaborative meetings. Legal complexity grew like a knot. My lawyer said it could drag on months. The client grew nervous but liked my leadership and urged quick resolution. Elena offered to mediate a clean agreement, fast and binding. I agreed. We drafted a contract with clauses protecting my authorship and future credit. The company accepted on the surface, but tension simmered. Meanwhile, the anonymous leak investigation turned toward a surprising suspect, a junior staffer who had access to the message board and had posted in frustration with management. The staffer confessed under pressure but denied naming names. The boss's allies whispered that I had orchestrated the leak to force results, which was a lie. My reputation throbbed with false rumors. I decided to be transparent. I published a calm personal note to my team explaining the timeline and expressing gratitude to my supporters. It was measured, not accusatory. Some responded with kindness, others stayed silent. The client approved my contract and asked me to begin work immediately. I felt relief and a new burden of responsibility. Work on the prototype began fast. The client gave me creative freedom and resources. I assembled a small team, Danny, Amir, and 2 new hires. We worked long hours in a hum of excitement. The prototype took shape, exactly the way I had imagined. Each milestone felt like redemption. I also kept an eye on the company, which had reshuffled teams and issued new IP policies. The boss was quiet but active behind doors. One evening, while reviewing code, I found a small piece of proprietary algorithm in the boss's earlier draft that matched a snippet he had used in meetings. It suggested he had indeed adapted parts of my work. We documented it. Then a twist. The board asked for a joint presentation where I would present the prototype and the company would remain a partner. The boss would be in the room. The client wanted the partnership signaled as collaborative for optics. I worry the boss might try to claim credit again on stage. Danny suggested a pre-meeting protocol. I would present first, and we would record everything. The day arrived, and I felt my nerves steady into focus. This presentation could secure everything, or open the door to more conflict. On presentation day, the room filled with chairs and cameras, and the boss sat stiff in the front row. I began to speak, voice firm and clear. The prototype demo worked beautifully. The client beamed. During Q&A, the boss stood and attempted to reframe a key technical point as his own improvement. The room tensed. I felt my anger flare but kept calm. I offered a factual correction, referencing the original design timeline, and provided on-the-spot documentation from my packet. The boss's attempt unraveled. Elena smiled with relief. The client stood and applauded my clarity. Afterwards, the board recognized my authorship publicly and adjusted the partnership memo to credit me. The boss's expression hardened. He whispered something to a colleague and walked out. That evening, an unexpected twist, my sister called with news. Our father had been hospitalized. The news hit me like a brick. I felt torn between the work that had consumed me and family that needed me. I packed and drove to the hospital. The prototype waited. The legal world waited. Life reminded me it had its own demands. I arrived, clasped my dad's hand, and the warmth of family steadied me. At the hospital, I stayed by my father's bedside and realized how much I'd fought to be seen. He squeezed my hand and told me he was proud. Those words filled a place in me that victory alone could not. I spent nights at home, splitting time between hospital visits and prototype meetings. Danny ran morning stand-ups and kept things steady. The team worked with kindness and focus. The boss seemed to vanish from direct contact, but his presence lingered in the rumor mill. The countersuit loomed quietly in the background. Then another twist arrived. The company's upper leadership announced a review of management conduct, sparked partly by our case and partly by other complaints. They formed a task force. The boss's reassignment now looked less like punishment and more like a prelude to deeper consequences. I worried about the human cost, people losing jobs, incomes disrupted. I didn't seek misery for anyone. I only wanted credit and fairness. The task force asked for interviews. Elena recommended I speak honestly but compassionately. I agreed. Speaking about my experience felt like pulling a thorn from a wound. The task force interviews revealed more than individual blame. They found systemic problems, vague policies, weak reporting channels, and a culture that sometimes rewarded loud voices over honest work. The company issued an internal memo promising reforms. They asked me to help shape new policies around idea ownership and reporting. I agreed, wanting to fix the system for others. The boss was asked to attend sensitivity training and mentorship review. He accepted but looked hollow. The countersuit slowly lost steam as leadership preferred settlements to public fights. The client relationship deepened. They offered to fund a joint study with the company to bring the product to market. I felt proud, but also wary of mixing gratitude with corporate politics. Then a personal twist, my father's condition improved. Standing at his window, watching sunlight, I felt a fragile peace. At work, Danny called. A colleague had found emails proving the boss knew about my drafts earlier than he claimed. The evidence was clear and unambiguous. I felt the knot of injustice finally loosening. Still, I knew the story wasn't over. People hurt in ways the public didn't see. I wanted to make sure there was accountability beyond mere policy memos. With new evidence in hand, leadership moved faster. The company settled with a formal apology and an internal report that named the failures. The boss faced consequences beyond reassignment. He lost certain privileges and had to undergo monitoring. It felt right, but I was also worried about the human fallout. I didn't want retribution for its own sake. I wanted corrections. The client signed a partnership contract naming me as lead creator and granting clear royalties and credit. My life tilted toward a new normal, work that honored me and a schedule balanced with family care. Publicly, the company announced its new IP protections and praised employee initiative. The announcement included a short nod to my role, careful and polished. The media picked up a small story about workplace fairness that mentioned the company and the client. I got messages from strangers grateful for how I handled things. They said my case encouraged them to speak up. that felt powerful and scary. My inbox is filled with both praise and hateful notes. I learned how loud the world could be. I chose to focus on the work and on helping the company build better systems. As the product moved into prototype funding, I formed a small team and started real development sprints. The work was creative and joyful. Danny and Amir were brilliant and kind, and Cameron helped with outreach. We set clear rules: credit logs, version control, and transparent meeting notes. The company adopted these practices across other teams too. I spoke at internal workshops about documenting ideas and advocating for fair credit. Each time I told my story, it felt less like revenge and more like teaching. The boss attended one such workshop after mentorship training. He sat in the back and left early. I chose compassion over celebration. My aim was change, not humiliation. Then a twist. A competitor tried to fast-track a similar product and launched a small-scale copy. The market buzzed. We had to move quickly and ethically. I coordinated a public demo with the client, showing how our product was different and superior. The demo went well, and the market reacted positively. Sales inquiries came in. Relief washed over me, proof that good work, credited properly, could win. Success brought new pressures. Investors asked for roadmaps, timelines, and promises. I learned to speak in measured terms while keeping my creative spark alive. The boss lingered at the edges of my life, sometimes emailing passive-aggressive notes. I ignored him and focused on building. Meanwhile, the company's reforms started to change culture slowly. More people documented ideas. More junior staffers felt safer. That ripple felt meaningful. Another twist arrived when a former colleague reached out, confessing they had regretted staying silent when the boss stole credit. They asked for advice on leaving and rebuilding confidence. I listened and encouraged them. Helping others heal felt like part of my victory. The client and I signed a long-term partnership. The product began to win small awards. I kept my father's progress close to my heart. We celebrated his recovery with a small meal. At night, I would sit and write in my notebook, the same one where the idea had first lived, reminded of where I started and how far I'd come. The company's annual review board recognized my contribution with a formal award. I gave a short speech about fairness and documentation, keeping my words simple and true. The applause felt honest. The boss was not present. Some colleagues who had been distant came up to congratulate me with genuine warmth. Elena smiled like a friend. The media wrote a longer piece about workplace ethics and used our case as a turning point. I received messages from young creators thanking me for choosing courage over silence. My life felt busier but fuller. Then a final twist. The boss approached me privately with a changed tone. He apologized sincerely, not with emptiness but with an effort that looked real. He asked for a chance to make amends by mentoring younger staff, only if leadership approved. I felt the urge to refuse, to hold on to my pain. But I remembered my father's words about forgiveness. I agreed, on condition that it be formal and supervised. Leadership accepted. The boss's path forward would be watched and guided. I felt a complicated peace settle over the battlefield. Months passed, and the product launched to positive reviews. Sales grew steadily. The client and company partnership strengthened. I moved into a stable role as lead consultant and later a product director, with clear credit and a fair compensation package. The company kept reforming policies, and I helped write the guidelines that became part of onboarding. The boss kept to his training and mentorship role, sometimes clumsy but trying. He never regained his former influence. My father's health continued to improve. I found balance, work that mattered and family time that healed. Then one quiet twist remained. My notebook, the original place of truth, disappeared from my drawer. Panic flooded me. I feared someone had taken it to discredit me. I retraced steps and asked my team. Danny smiled and pointed to the cafe where we had first planned a public workshop. The notebook sat on a table with a small card. For when you need reminding of why you started. I laughed and cried at once. It felt like closure, a small, human confirmation that my story had a heart beyond the headlines. Now, looking back, I see how crooked the path was and how straight it became because of persistence and quiet allies. I felt hurt in the stairwell, angry in the meeting room, and proud on the podium. I learned the power of evidence, the safety of honest witnesses, and the change that comes when systems are fixed. I also learned to forgive, not to erase the past, but to allow healing. The boss did lose privilege, but he also had a chance to change. I don't want cruelty for anyone. My victory was not only in the contract or the award, but in making the workplace safer for the next person who brings an idea. People still ask how I did it. I tell them, document, find allies, keep calm, and choose fairness over fury. The client became a partner, my product found its path, and my family stayed my anchor. On a shelf, the notebook sits with the prototype award beside it. Sometimes, I open it and remember the raw sketch of a thought that became more than mine. The world still surprises me, but now I know I can meet those surprises with steady hands. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story, and don't forget to like the video to help others find it.